Hello there. My name is Doc Conrad, and this is my little preamble to the podcast. First of all, I want to say thank you to the wonderful guests and artists who have decided to help out on this podcast. Everyone who I've interviewed, I really do appreciate it. To all the listeners, I also wanted to say thank you as well. You guys mean the world to me and make it so that way I can continue to work on this podcast. I also want to go ahead and say thank you to the wonderful artists who helped make this podcast possible. At Mellowscav, at MELOSCAV, created the icon for this podcast, and at Doidaflower, at DOIDUHFLOWER, is the artist behind the visuals on YouTube and all other social media sites. I also want to go ahead and say thank you so much, Tyler, aka the DM behind Missrolled Adventures, for doing this interview with me. It was a wonderful interview getting to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm sure that you will all enjoy it. You could follow Tyler at Missrolled on Twitter to get updates on the show. With that being said, I don't want to leave any of you waiting, so why don't we go ahead and get things rolling. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Commissions Open, an interview podcast all about art in the digital age. Hear the processes, stories, and lives of artists, voice actors, video creators, editors, musicians, and many other talented creators in the era of online work. I am your host, Doc Conrad, and today we have one of the most unique guests I've ever had before. This person is not exactly a freelance creator, however, they are in the podcasting realm, and they are definitely an online creator. I'd like to give a huge warm welcome to Tyler of Missrolled Adventures. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you.
All right, so Tyler, if you would go ahead and I guess the best way to go ahead and go about this is, what exactly is it that you do for Missrolled Adventures?
Well, I'm the DM of a Dungeons and Dragons podcast and actual play for a number of shows, but I'm essentially everything that goes on in the background apart from actually playing. I do the editing for the audio, the editing for the video portion that we now started, as well as finding character art, commissioning plans, creating imagery for stat blocks, things like that.
Okay. So how is it that you got into D&D in the first place? Because I know that this game is a very old sort of game, starting back in like the 80s. And I've been a fan of it as well, and that's one of the main reasons why I was like, when I realized like, oh, I can interview somebody who's actually worked on a D&D podcast, I realized that like it's been something that I've wanted to go ahead and discuss a little bit about. So why don't you go ahead and tell me about how you first got into D&D?
Well, basically it was probably 2 years or 3 years. I can't exactly remember when I first saw this, but I used to watch a YouTube channel called Rooster Teeth. They have all this achievement hunter stuff, and they just play games, make videos from that. But then I saw one that was called Heroes and Halfwits, and I went into that just kind of expecting it to be classical, anything goes, achievement hunter videos. But it was Dungeons and Dragons related, and I've heard about it. I've never really played any of it, seen any of it, but I've heard about it for some. And when I was watching it, I was watching them play, laughing, because it's obviously a very comedic show. But I was also actually paying attention to the details behind it, and it started to get me interested in learning more about it. So then I went across other platforms to watch other groups. I watched a Yogscast one. I started watching Critical Role a little bit, as well as just like reading about it, like going onto Google, just typing in random stories that people had. And that's what kind of got me interested in Dungeons and Dragons, kind of actually like broadening what I want to do with it. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was, if you didn't have anything else to say involving like how you personally got into it, I'd love to talk about also getting your group of friends to go ahead and join you along with it. Because I know it takes anybody can be interested in D&D. It takes a whole lot more to plan out and schedule a whole campaign.
Basically, I was living in a home that had 4 bedrooms and we had 5 people living inside of it. All the other 4 people, apart from myself, basically started to play. I just asked them, made a character, set up a table, and then that night we played. They loved it. Our group was actually supposed to start with an extra person, but he got sidetracked by doing some other stuff, and he didn't feel necessarily excited to play. So he decided that he'll just skip out for it. But so basically, I got them into playing it because I just went and asked, and they said sure. Nothing fancy about that.
So what exactly are is your current group dynamic compared to when you first started? Because you have you said you had 6 to 7 players that constantly come through, and sometimes you have one shots, and that's why you have your various different stories inside of your podcast feed. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about them?
So when we first started, all of my players didn't know anything. They didn't know anything about the game, any of the plans, any thought into their characters. So that's why a lot of our rule set is very lenient in certain regards. Because it's a learning experience for all the players, as well as myself being a DM, because at the time, never even played D&D, only read and watched about it. And that's the only reason I was the DM. So early on, we really didn't know how to exactly feel playing it. And also being only 4 of us, it was, 5 of us at the table, including myself, it was a little bit hard to kind of keep character interaction going. But now that we've been doing it for over 2 years, we have grown a lot more. We've gotten a few extra people as well. About halfway into, so about 6 months into actually playing, one of our friends who we had met completely through a video game online. We played Final Fantasy XIV, and I was talking to him. He's done D&D for years and years and years, and he had actually finished his own campaign. It was kind of sad that he wasn't going to be able to play anymore. So I offered him if he wanted to play through Discord, and from that day on, he's been a part of the group. Then later down the road, we get our 6th member who joins in. And the reason why he joined was because, unfortunately, one of our other players' schedules had faded, so he wasn't able to actually join the tables nearly as much. His schedule was very erratic, and there were moments where he would be 6 or 7 weeks out of actually playing, and it became difficult for him to try to manage, so we both came to an agreement that he'll wait out and join in for one-shots. He's one of the members that actually joins for the one-shots. So we had 5. Game continues, and those 2, the new ones that had joined, actually had experience, so they were kind of helping the newer players understand. Then we just had a friend from work. I asked if he wanted to play. He said he's never played, and I said that's totally fine. None of my other friends really know how to play other than 2 people, so he joins. But between all of us, it's gotten a lot more passionate. I, as a DM, have gotten a bit more interactive with my players, a lot less statistic-based, and honestly a lot more calm. Because before, I would plan each and every single little thing, and that was stressful. It was difficult to do, and then even then, generally you're not going to plan out the realm of infinity. So eventually I just started to improvise things and build the story from there. And that got a lot more interesting because then the players' choices felt like they actually had more to go off of.
As a fellow DM, I have to definitely say that some of the best moments come in from improvising and reading what what the player wants, giving them a little bit of what they want, but focusing a lot of what you want to do, because what they feel is that their character impact matters, despite the fact that you're able to change the way that they were initially intending it to happen, to fit more into what you align with. And it is a big impact, especially when it comes with player dynamics. It's great to go ahead and talk about, and I love hearing these stories about you getting more free flow with it. because that's one of the big things a lot of new DMs get stuck on is sticking to the rules because they're concerned about everything else.
Yeah, no, that pretty much went out the window after the third sit down because it was just a tax. I was paying attention to weight, paying
Ooh.
attention to a lot of inner mechanics that had just this nitpicking, and immediately I'm just like, I'm not gonna deal with those. It's too much stress on my end, and the players clearly are not having fun keeping track of how many uh, food rations they have.
Mm-hmm.
So unless they're carrying something abnormally large for a single person, it's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that in terms of like in terms of having a fun and interactive story campaign, every single campaign is going to be different, and I definitely think newer players can have I think newer players can be some of the best. Those that don't know enough will play with you in the same space of like the theater of the mind, so to speak. Because if you are a hardcore stickler for the rules, and you know a lot about them, and you are into the older versions of D&D, it's a lot harder to go ahead and like accept yourself and bring out. I have this podcast is going to be all about you, but I'm just like speaking a little bit of experience. I've had to play
Mm-hmm.
with somebody who started from an D&D, like the second version.
Oh, geez.
And he was a friend's dad, and he was the initial guy who got me into D&D. But him as a player is very much like stats. Everything stats. I want to make sure that my thing that I do is right. I don't want to go ahead and fail and have my character die, because a lot of what happened previously was that there was a large amount of bookkeeping inside of the game, and a lot of players died because they chose the wrong decision without there being any sort of knowledge. But with 5e especially, it is a lot more freeing, and it can be one of the biggest like breaths of realization that like, oh, I can have fun in this game now.
Yeah, I don't have any other experience in other tabletop RPGs other than D&D 5e.
Mhm.
I've watched streams of Pathfinder 2e and Pathfinder, a lot of different homebrewed elements. So when I initially started watching and I was seeing all these different creative ideas, I just moved into homebrewing a lot more. Initially starting, we actually used a module for Horde of the Dragon Queen, and I had completely changed it, pretty much all of it except for places and certain events. By this point in the campaign, we have completely devolved from the module because it made more sense to do it this way.
Mhm.
From the get-go, I just started using homebrewed ideas that mixed well with the story. And from there, the characters have been notified, they've been researching, finding it more interesting than just going from point A to point B when they have these other things that are intertwined in between it. Something to look in between of just traveling,
Mhm.
which was a lot of what the Horde of the Dragon Queens module was about, was going to the city of Greenest, beating what's there, going to a cultist camp, beating what's there, going back, then going back to the cultist camp to beat what's there inside of the cultist camp. It was just a lot of point and click traveling, and it wasn't something that I enjoyed as a DM. So what instead is I just kind of added in these other portions of it that explained the purpose of doing these things, as well as letting time pass, because as time passes, not everything is just going to revolve around them. Everything in the world is going on.
Mm.
So the further they wait in a certain area, the more dangerous another place could be, or less dangerous, depending on what's going on. Maybe what happened there already happened, so then they have to go learn what happened and then try to prevent it from happening to somewhere else.
Hmm. No, having the ability to go ahead and dynamically change the thing, and keeping in mind a little bit of tabs, like, okay, this place changed because of this initially, and deviating from the rule set is one of the best things about D&D, and I definitely think homebrew is one of the best things to happen to especially actual play podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't hear it. Sometimes the listener doesn't hear it. But for those who like do, and those who pay attention to the modules and read them and go ahead and play through them, hearing a person's fresh experience with it, while having like things totally change, can be like a breathtaking experience, and like not breathtaking, but a breath of fresh air at least. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like watching someone else playing something. there's that same experience of, well, what are they gonna do? Like, it's like watching an open world kind of thing. You don't know where they're going to start with, and some things are different. So there's still that shock value and surprise, as well as twists and turns.
Yeah.
It's a very big thing. I know that about 3 or 4 people that are in this module that were supposed to be dead are already alive, and some people that are supposed to be alive are definitely dead. Things just happen because everything can randomly happen. And based off of certain things that happen, more intense and dramatic moments can occur. There was a character at the very start of our campaign named Escobert Redbeard, and he's a character that was meant to be alive. He's a crucial individual. Later down the line, everything was supposed to be kind of important for him to be in this city. Well, he was immediately killed by a blue dragon that was supposed to show up in this section of the story as well. This is super early, but he just failed to save, took an extreme amount of damage, and I figured, well, this is a good moment to have, because the players have been enthralled by him, because he was easily trouncing hordes of kobolds and everything like that. So that was their first kind of loss, and that kind of derived more emotion. Later on, they encouraged a small boy that he was Escobert's favorite, so now he got a bunch of confidence. There was a statue enshrined, and each player gave a very brief but heartfelt speech about this character. And this character is supposed to be alive. It's just interesting.
Yeah, and I think deviating from a model is something that is still like has a little bit of structure and gives you a little bit of freedom with it, but you have a little bit of you have a lot more like creative room, especially when you decide to ignore it. And that's a really good story about like the way that things can dynamically change and the fun you can have with D&D. Everything is suggested, and there's in this case there was no wrong answer to that with like how you play that out for the players. But what I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about is the amount of time you dedicate to writing, because I know you said you do a lot of you used to do a lot of writing towards it, but you do a lot more you do a lot of like free form with it now. Do you spend any time like developing like what you want to happen, or do you always play it by ear, and if things like fall back, you like default to the you default to the script, quote unquote, with the handbook?
Well, I can't necessarily default to the module currently because we are so far off track of it that it would make zero sense. But what I use for writing is actually encounter building. One of the biggest things that I enjoy, which is probably the most statistically heavy in the campaign, is I randomly roll for each and every single one of their creatures' health, because they have a total like die number rather than the average. So that way you don't know whether or not this creature could be weak or could be stronger. If they have maximum health, then they're a much larger buffer orc or a significantly bigger winged creature. While if something has super small health because they rolled so poorly, it's maybe sick. It might not be fully developed, or even if it's already injured from something else and it just didn't heal properly, like it has an infection. Things like that can create, because not every single creature is going to be a cookie cutout. There's going to be smaller ones, there's going to be bigger ones, some weaker, some stronger. So the randomized health portion of it, which is mainly only something that I have to handle on my end, creates this wonder if whether or not they're actually going to be strong or not. And that throws a wrench into some of my players who know what the game's like, because I also I write down in the stat blocks that I kind of create for them altercations to them, so that way players that already know like a creature's weakness might not be the weakness anymore. It might be something else, or it could be something more. There's certain things that I've changed, and that's the thing that I write down mainly. Otherwise, I pay close attention to like main story moments, big created ideas rather than specific details. So if a player wants to go and say the party wants to go to a city, well, they're traveling towards the city. Easy as it can be, there's generally not a whole lot of problems when traveling by cart or by horseback. Maybe an encounter here or there, but generally it's a safer travel. Once they get there, depending on what they do, that's where I throw in the improv. I would make maybe one or two buildings that are actually designed around the city, but if they wanted to go out, find a hairdresser, dryer, dye maker, clothes artist, anything, a lot of those are always generally in a city unless it's under turmoil. So that way they can just be more free will about it. So I don't generally write a whole lot apart from on my off time at work, where I just jot down note ideas, because this would be super interesting for a specific character's development. I'm going to jot this note down, maybe flesh that out later on. Usually for big story things, I only have 2 to 3 pages typed up for just notes.
Okay. Yeah, you having a loose set of a loose idea in terms of like the various details really helps with whatever the players do, but the main ideas is what's most important for you getting them there to someplace eventually, and you can always fill in the details during which you tell them about the story. So it's and a lot of times they have the players, the ones who are impacting the story the most. So if they mess something up, you're able to go ahead and give them the wiggle room to mess it up. Or if they succeed like spectacularly, you have the capability to help them succeed spectacularly. So yeah, that all makes sense. Now what I also want to go ahead and touch on a little bit is you mentioned that you also have a job outside of this podcast, and I'm guessing like a lot of this is just mostly done as like not only is it as a fun pastime, but it's hopefully eventual like business venture, because it's like it's you're wanting to go ahead and grow this into a bigger and bigger thing.
Absolutely.
What is your current job currently doing outside of doing this at the very moment?
Well, being so late in this interview, I work the night shift at a manufacturing plant for circuit boards that go into a number of products. Some of them go into microwaves, some of them go into the big heating units for when you walk into a door, like walk into a building like Walmart, and they have that huge heater that separates the cold air from the inside air. So I just construct those, but mostly I test them to make sure that the products themselves are actually working.
Okay.
As a result, I have free will of where I want to use my hands while something is testing, because a lot of it's automated. That's where I get a lot of just me sitting down, thinking of ideas, and jotting them down. So that way I have more free time to do editing, because it's a lot of work to do everything by yourself.
Especially with large I've learned from running this podcast that turns out running just audio for a long lengthy period of time is can be a little bit taxing on your computer. And having a little bit of extra time to go ahead and think things out when you're not exactly right in front of it might help out a little bit. So it's a good thing to go ahead and have that. As someone who has who spends a minimal amount of time working outside of doing this podcast, it's really cool. It's a really cool thing to go and hear more about like the people who have jobs outside of their creative ventures, and hearing what they do as well, because like you never know what exactly it is the person who is like what else the person who is currently working at like a job is doing. It's always like an interesting thing to go and talk about. I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like for it, even then, I'm always just kind of deciding on, well, what are some ways to kind of improve these things? So I make a checklist of maybe ideas to kind of enhance the quality, things like that. Because I know that, for instance, even in this interview, you were saying that you use OBS. Well, I only use Audacity and a single microphone for our entire table. Maybe searching for a different audio program. So I kind of research some there. On my breaks, I use Google to try to find a few things. And it's just something that's kind of giving me a good pastime even at work, not just at home.
you having that little bit of freedom to go ahead and like search up things during the time in which it's like happening.
Hmm.
Excuse me, it's like midnight for me.
Yeah.
The the ability to go ahead and like have that sort of freedom to like, even though you're still working, like I'd say the time in which you're on your feet and or like not having anything immediately in front of you to just scroll through whatever sort of social media site really gives you a lot of freedom to go ahead and like a lot of creative freedom to think about things. And that's something that a lot of people take for granted, is the free time that they have at home can sometimes just be wasted on individual things, whereas the time at work can be spent like thinking about different things outside of just doing the work. I know I used to do that a
Absolutely.
lot. Yeah, you doing it for your campaigns or running for this passion project. I'm guessing there's some times where I feel like I get more done at work, involving this show, just walking around having to do my job, thinking about it, than I do when I'm actually sitting at home working on the work. It's
Absolutely.
yeah.
Um, Another thing that I tend to do is just create items, create objects, write up some stuff. When I write it at work, I just come home and I just copy it over rather than having to sit down and think about it while I'm at home. So it's just copy and pasting it over
Hmm.
from a piece of paper that I hand write. So something that would have taken 4 to 5 hours sitting down was 6 to 7 hours because I'm doing other things at work, which is something that I wouldn't have been able to do anywhere else.
Hmm.
So absolutely, you can get plenty of work done even at work, more so sometimes than being at home.
Yeah, multitasking is a big thing for this generation, and that's why that's where podcasts come in. Hey, everybody, be sure to go ahead
especially
and
being
yeah,
especially being a DM.
yeah. Hey, everybody, be sure to go ahead and follow this podcast and and
Hmm.
Missrolled. But anyway, no, there are plenty of people who realize that like this sort of long form actual play podcast is something that I've enjoyed. Especially in my delivery driving days, where
Ooh.
where every time I would go ahead and I'd pop on an episode of Critical Role or Bombarded or the Adventure Zone. I would just like pop the some of the bigger podcasts in while while I was driving. I would go to my destination, stop the player, deliver the pizza, drive back to the store, and still keep listening, and I would get through like 2 or 3 episodes every single shift just from like the amount of time I was spent delivery driving. So there's a lot of times where getting your creative work out there can really help improve and affect people's lives in a way you don't fully understand. And I'm glad to finally talk to somebody in podcasting who has something like that.
Absolutely. Even at work too, I have an earbud in consistently playing other podcasts or shows that they do, actual plays.
Hmm.
So I can listen to a 40-hour work week's worth of other content, and that can both helps them with just interacting with the community more, and also helps yourself with being a DM or a content creator, because listening to someone else's content gives inspiration towards your own, and it's a community that's built off of growing off of each other, which
Hmm.
is one of the biggest things about having a podcast or an actual play listenership, is building off of each other as a community. It's honestly something that I've never experienced before up until a year ago, basically.
Um. So, the community is really great, and I think it's very much inclusive. There's a lot of different types of like podcasts that have popped up to represent like different types of people or have
Hmm.
different groups of friends and all of that sort of thing. I especially love how much this medium has been able to be like a beacon of not only representation for different groups, but also like all in all, it shows like the real joys of just having a lot of different groups of friends coming together and listening into a long form story format that you can really attach yourselves to, especially as a listener. And I definitely think that the space as a whole is great for that, but I definitely think yours is a very welcome, a very welcome inclusion into that space. I definitely think that you can make it stand out by far, must say.
Yeah, it's because of the fact that there's so many of them too, the listeners are able to kind of learn what they like about it, learn what certain people do, what groups do, liking certain systems, or even just liking what kind of story they want to hear. Because there's some that are lighthearted. Not everything has to be about maiming or trying to prevent the loss of the world. Some things are just like, oh, we're at school trying to learn how to do some spell casting, stuff like that. There's so many different kinds of stories, and each one of themselves is unique to each other.
You give me your podcast now.
Sure, yeah, I guess you can have it.
Thank you. What is this? You don't have a script.
No, I don't got a script. This is the middle bit of the podcast. It's a casual interview.
What am I supposed to read?
You just go off the top of your head, man. It's fine.
Well, I don't perform well under pressure. I mean,
Do you want me to go ahead and read?
yeah, you go ahead and do this. I'll do this later.
Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to the middle bit of the podcast. I just want to go ahead and say thank you so much for listening. Right now, you can go ahead and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Newgrounds, and on Tumblr at Comms Open Podcast. You can find me anywhere on that, and you can also find me on YouTube, where you can go ahead and look at these different videos each and every single week. And I am also on Spotify, on iTunes, on whatever podcasting platform you prefer and listen to. I'm thinking I'm on there. If you have a place you want me to go ahead and be on, go ahead and let me know. I would really love to go ahead and be wherever you guys are. That being said, I want to go ahead and also give a huge shout out to Tyler for this episode. It was a great interview that I had with him. I'm really glad I got a chance to go and expand this podcast to something further other than just traditional art. It really does bring a smile on my face that I can include storytelling in this podcast. Next, I want to go ahead and say, Happy Pride Month, everybody. I want to make sure that this podcast is a platform where you can feel safe and feel comfortable with who you are. And I think that talking to different artists is one of the best ways to go ahead and do that and learn different perspectives of different types of people in all their walks of life. And hopefully you enjoy the stories that they tell. I think it's really important to hear their perspectives on art and their lives and everything involved. So I want to say, once again, Happy Pride. Lastly, I want to go ahead and do another rundown of some comments that we had. I'll go ahead and pick one out right here. Here we go. Here's one from Perry Novell on buymeacoffee.com. There, they actually supported the podcast and gave me $10, which I really do appreciate. They said, I've been listening to your podcast since the first episode, and I absolutely love it. I always look forward to hearing all the different stories and artistic directions that inspire the creators who you interview. Thank you for helping bring awareness to the world of commissioning and to all the guests on your show. Heart. Thank you, Puri. It really means a lot to me, actually. I know who you are IRL, but I just want to go ahead and say that this really means a lot to me that you would support me in this manner. You wouldn't have to. You could just go ahead and just listen all you want for free, but it really does mean a lot to me that you decide to go ahead and do that. Speaking of, relatively soon, I'm going to be adding a bit more to my Buy Me a Coffee page, buymeacoffee.com/commsopenpodcast, and I'm going to add some membership deals with that, so you guys can go ahead and support the show if you'd like on a monthly basis, and I can go ahead and give you guys a little bit of extra content if you'd like. I just want to go ahead and say, once again, thank you so much. Everybody who has left a positive comment, who has shared on social media, and who listens to the podcast. I can't believe that I've been able to go ahead and grow as much as I have in this short period of time, and I hope that I'm going to be able to grow even further as time goes on. And I hope that I'll be able to go ahead and interview amazing and wonderful guests as long as I can. So, if you want to go ahead and support me, there's my Buy Me a Coffee page, which is linked in all my links. You can also follow me on my various social media platforms, and honestly, just leaving a review wherever you can is 100% fine with me. Thank you so much, and I'll go ahead and get you back to the episode.
Can I have the podcast now?
No, you can't.
I'm sorry. All right, follow lead.
I definitely think that having a wide variety of podcasts really helps the field in general, but it also can make it a little bit difficult for like different groups to get to stand out. Especially with how it's not relatively easy to go ahead and make a actual play podcast, but that's one of the biggest like contenders inside the field of podcasting is actual play podcasts, especially in the nerdy and gaming genre. What do you what do you think have been some of your like personal inspirations for your campaign, like ones you're listening to now or something like that?
So some of the biggest inspirations have been some DMs that I've seen. Chris Perkins of I'm blanking on the name right now. The one that had Chris Perkins as a person in general has been a big inspiration. And kind of seeing his creative aspect of what he kind of designs and makes, even wrapped around a certain module's idea, is really inspirational. Kind of getting that homebrewed and creative aspect more than just reading a book and going by the book. It's creating the world and then also adapting that world to a certain setting that you want, not specifically something that someone else has already probably seen. Another inspiration is Frank from Heroes and Halfwits. He was the DM. Being the first one to see, I think it was really important to actually see how he dungeon mastered, because that's probably one of the biggest things that's important, is your first impression. If trying to be a DM and never seeing what a DM is like, your first impression is gonna really adapt how you kind of play at your table. If you see someone who's extremely strict, extremely critical to the rules and settings, and that's your first impression, it's like, well, I have to do the same thing. But when I was watching Frank, he was completely jovial about it. Things were sometimes fine, some things were also not fine. He would say no, he would say yes, and that's something that's really important to me. Is yes, the players can do anything, and that's an important factor. They can quite literally go somewhere else, do something. They want to try to talk to someone. Absolutely. If it's impossible, it's impossible. A dice roll isn't going to determine that. You're not going to roll a natural 20 to leap 60 feet across buildings without any kind of exterior force pushing you. It's just not physically possible for the most part. And that was something that I learned while watching Frank, was what to kind of create to make it more enjoyable for the players rather than being 100% by the books. I think that's easily one of the biggest inspirations for me as a DM. And it's been probably what started the level of creativity inside of our own campaign's world.
Okay. I've never I've heard a little bit about what was it, Chris Perkins, I believe. I've heard a little bit about him, but I haven't heard of the other gentleman, so I'm have to go and look those people up. But anyway,
I can Twitter the other one.
Oh yeah. But what was it? Let's see here. Let me look through my little list of questions real quick.
Frank J. Kim is the one that is the DM.
Okay.
Of the Heroes and Halfwits.
Okay. Yeah, he. Okay, yeah. Now I'm starting to go ahead and remember him. He is is he the bald gentleman, I believe, or is he? Yeah. And now I'm getting it. Now I'm picturing my head. It just took a second for me. I haven't listened to I've only listened to a couple episodes of Heroes and Halfwits. It's so cool how like you've gotten like different starts from me, because I feel like my cousin introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons through the Adventure Zone, at least like, well, not D&D, but actual play podcasts through the Adventure Zone. And so hearing it from hearing like people get a different start from all sorts of different directions is like a great thing to go and hear, because I know there's a lot of actual play podcasts out there, and so hearing that like there's some other places where people start, and there's some other places where people enjoy, and there's sort of like everybody's own individual niche. Like it's great to go in here. And it's great to go in here that you're inspired by him, especially in your freedom and creativity, because that's one of the most I think that's one of my most personal thing that I like to go ahead and do as a DM. But what would you go ahead and say is okay, here we go. Would you consider what you do to be a form of creative writing, or something along those lines? How would you consider what would you consider the artistic the quote unquote artistic merit of being a DM being?
From my personal experiences, I would say, because we essentially run 2 campaigns weekly, and we upload every week, or attempt to. And from my personal experiences, the campaign where a lot of us, there's 6 of us, there's a 6-person party, and then me DMing, it's very traditional. You get those moments of, well, it's a party. Everyone's unique to their own person. They all have their own different stories, their own personalities. It's very traditional in that aspect. I would say it's creative mainly in how changing the world is, because it's changed instead of the normal setting that other worlds kind of take place in. I've commissioned a map to completely change the direction of things, as well as the knowledge that goes along with it, and certain monumental key pieces to certain cities I've also edited. So it's not necessarily the most creative thing, because it's a very traditional one, and it's meant for inner player communication as well as story developments between characters. What I would say is fairly unique, as I haven't, unless I've missed it, but I haven't seen something like this before. Me and one of those players, we run a show called Double Time, and the way we do that is it's a 1-to-1 campaign where we forcibly switch the roles of DM and player every real hour. So one person will be the DM, the other will be the player. Then after real life hour, we switch roles. Our character has a split mind, and we play as a changeling. So that way we can have 2 different personalities, 2 different proficiencies, and we just go. There's not, like I say, it's basically 99% improvised, because you have 2 dungeon masters creating a story based off of what the other person did, as well as their own actions. So it's very different and is heavily improvised, and easily has a number of loopholes involved, or not loopholes, plot holes, but it's all for fun. And that's one of the most creative aspects of it, is you can do anything with a story. We didn't even start with a campaign idea. We started as thieves, basically, inside of the city, and as a result of some failed thievery, we used a teleportation circle that launched us to Isgard. From there, it just became a huge mind confusion. So it's very unique because of the fact that we switch roles, and there's a dynamic that follows that the other one will know what the other one saw, things like that. And it created this character that enjoys their own company, because it's the other person that's taking control. It's also just lighthearted and fun, because we don't have the stress of having to forcibly plan out every single little detail. Being a 1-to-1 campaign, you only really have to worry about the other person, and then if any NPCs are following them, things like that. So it's just nice and refreshing to not have to worry about every single little detail, because you just make it up on the spot anyways.
No, I definitely think that is, not only is it a unique idea, and it definitely shows like the ability to go ahead and have it not only shows the creative ability of this whole campaign, and giving of like not campaign, how do I put this? not only does it go ahead and show the versatility of this game, but how you can work any sort of thing in a different sort of mindset, and you being able to go ahead and take a recommended game with like a group of more than like 4, 5, 6 players, and being able to be like, oh, a one-on-one experience where the roles can swap every hour is like something that like it's very unique. And it is also excuse me, it's not only
Bless
very
you.
unique, and it really gives like an insider's perspective on like to the other player like what you want to do, and being able to play off of that in either a jabby like, ha, I'm not gonna do that thing because I'm mad at myself, or or like, let me go and actually help myself do this thing that they wanted to go ahead and do because I have vested interest in this as well. Like it creates a really interesting and unique dynamic, especially with specifically that. But what I'd also like to go ahead and talk about is your other campaigns. I want to go ahead and hear. How about you just give me just like a general summary on what your other 2 campaigns are, because Double Time is one that you just got done describing. What about your the Great Gods War?
So the Great Gods War is a module campaign based around Horde of the Dragon Queen. Goal of it is the party, rather than starting in Greenest and just because that's where how this book kind of goes by, is they all start in a tavern at Greenest, and I know for a fact that the biggest cliche is you all meet in a tavern. I knew that before even starting the campaign, and that didn't interest me. So instead, from the southern continent of Wolsk, a commander slowly was building a force that wanted to go in because the Cult of the Dragon in the past was creating this force that was very dangerous. So to kind of find out what they're doing, trying to thwart them, they're sending a very small group that's meant to be covert to Greenest to ship a number of weapons, food, and provisions so that way they can build a fortification inside of Greenest. That was how I first introduced the campaign, because Chapter 1, if people don't know, of Horde of the Dragon Queen is very heavily combat-based, especially being level 1 characters. So to introduce them, rather than full-blown war, they encountered a toll gate that was manned by bandits that were very incompetent with what they did. That was their first interaction with kind of how the game would play for a combat-wise before going into it. Well, they very slowly get more knowledgeable about the game, and this is where the leniency kind of comes into, because they didn't know how the game exactly ran. One of my players, who happens to play a bard, wanted to be a supporting character that wasn't a cleric. And I'm like, that's totally fine. Bard is essentially one of the other supporting characters. You give bardic inspirations, all this stuff. And he goes, perfect for me. He did not take a single spell that would deal any damage. Nothing. And as a result, he was very heavily gimped at level 1. But one of the lenient rules that I have is you can change your spells at a long rest. Early in the game, it was this, and then later on, it's kind of developed into something else. But that's to kind of let them know, like, try things out. So a lot of the Great Gods War initially was just them trying to learn how to play the game. And then when we started recording was when they generally knew how to play the game. They just didn't know a lot about the game. So everything that was occurring in the world was generally really surprising to them. Apart from the 2 players that knew kind of how D&D worked, being in their own campaigns and running their own games. So they were more like the veterans that were kind of keeping back a bit and letting the new players kind of learn about the world. Quickly realizing as well that I have changed a vast majority of the world, so they themselves don't know a lot about it anyways. It's very, both situations of all of our shows are a lot more heavily RP based and roleplay based. So you get to see characters interacting amongst the group. For the first, I think, 21 episodes, which I regret so much that it was the very beginning that we started with, because I find it excruciatingly painful to listen to, but it's so crucial to the story. They're traveling in a caravan from Baldur's Gate to Waterdeep. There are several character events. Every single person that's in this caravan of nearly 35 people are unique. They have different names, their own plot, their own plans, their own groups. This entire group is nearly 35 people. So 8 of them are the party, and then a little bit over 20 of them are NPCs that I've developed. So they go through this, and they go through a ton of different events wrapped around it. And that's when they kind of realize traveling sucks. They quickly realize they don't want to travel like that anymore. So there's tons of different ways to get around it. There's sailing. They're actually currently using an airship. That's very new development because we have in this campaign setting, there's not a huge technology-based setting. So this is a prototype to them. Well, that's that campaign. They're all about trying to find the Cult of the Dragon and trying to stop the resurrection of Tiamat as far as they can tell. To not throw spoilers out there, they learned something very recently in episode about, I think, 32, 33-ish. Something that was revealed since before we even started playing the campaign. I had gone to each group and spoke to them about certain specific, and each of them had knowledge of something that the others didn't, and that is revealed at that point. Something that happened over 2 years ago, and that their players have kept secret from each other for 2 years was revealed, and it was a huge eye-opener for how expansive this world is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Great Gods War.
Okay.
The one-shots we do vary drastically from each other. I've had some where they're very heavily roleplay based, and they're trying to find a specific creature, the ACTS, the Abyssal Creature Termination Squadron, I think is what I named it. But their goal was to go into a city and thwart an abyssal creature from pulling that portion of the material plane into the abyss, as this has been going on for so many years covertly. So they had to be very stealthy about what they say, and they're searching for a single creature inside of an expansive city. So that's very heavily roleplay based. We did a winter one for holidays, and that one was nearly all combat based. It was, and it's all for fun. So the players make whatever they want essentially, and I'm full gung ho about making up races at the time, stat blocks for things. In the winter one, we had somebody who was trying to play as Jack Frost. So that was the idea he gave me, and I said, all right, then what we can do is to kind of have the aesthetic of Jack Frost, a winter Eladrin. I don't think there's a stat block for that, so I just made one up on the spot, and the best thing was to give him a magic item that quite literally did everything that Jack Frost did. So I just go from there and just kind of build a character-wise that they want, and then kind of put that into a setting. A lot of times the players don't know what the setting is until they kind of come up with like a character design. Or no, sorry, I get that reversed. They know what the story is initially about, and that's kind of how they build their character. We have a one-shot coming up where they don't know the setting. They just know that they're essentially civilians inside of a city. And then they have to leave to go find something. They have to find the reason why a city hasn't been giving their smaller town provisions. So they're about to travel up north to go to the main capital. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if anything's going to happen or what's going on. So that's a very different dynamic than what we've done for other one-shots.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much really it. Double Time is, as I said before, very, very complex and rather confusing if only told.
No, I appreciate you going ahead and like having not only like what I have to say here is this is going to be a little bit of like praise towards you, because you've not only DM'd you're not only DMing like a big campaign that you have going on that you mostly work on in your free time. You have the one shots that you go ahead and develop as well. Whether or not you go ahead and use some sort of like base guideline or whatnot, still you have to go ahead and take the time to go ahead and create and help out for each of the characters. And you have another show involved with another person about creating one of the most unique dynamics in terms of a actual play podcast I've ever heard about. You've got a lot of stuff on your plate, and you do a really, you do really good stuff about that, man.
I thank you. I definitely do little things apart from that at this point. Um, but I mean, it's all for fun. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest things I have fun with is creature voices and sounds and stuff like that. So I just do that while I'm driving to work, coming home. I just do voice stuff because it's just something fun to do.
Mm-hmm. No,
D&D has definitely encompassed my life.
I fully understand that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about your experience with not only DMing and your experience with running a campaign and being a player and everything involving D&D. And I think a lot of people have gotten that portion of it. But a lot of people, I'm guessing, don't know too much about you, Tyler. What if you want to go ahead and I'm not saying to go ahead. I'm doing the DM sin of saying, "Give me your backstory." But but why don't you go ahead and do it? I mean, I'd love to go and hear a little bit about like where you're from and all of that, and and everything involved with that, like how you got to this point.
Well, truth be told, I'm rather an open book. I don't exactly feel, I don't know, uncomfortable just talking about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I've grown up in Minnesota, so snow country. Everything
Illinois
is just covered in snow.
Illinois says, "Hey." Yeah.
I've changed drastically from when I was a kid. I know that's a fact. I was rather shy, didn't talk much, and I was also very short. And then everything changed the moment I think a week passed. And I can attest to that because my roommate, who's in the other room next to me, we've been friends since high school. He's also one of the players of our table.
Mm-hmm.
I was working at a fair, Valley Fair, and at the time, I think I was probably barely 5 foot tall, I think, and I was very shy, low voice, or kind of quiet voice. And then over the span of it ending and then school starting, which is about like a week, maybe 2 weeks, my roommate had seen me, didn't recognize me as I had become about 5'7". My voice had drastically changed, and I was growing facial hair in a matter of 2 weeks. And that was really when everything had started to change. I started to become more outgoing. I've done Taekwondo before. I am actually a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo. I mean, that's been 4 or 5 years ago, so I'm nowhere near trained anymore. But kind of what I've gotten to is I've always been a video gamer. I've always played these, even since I was 4 or 5, I've been playing on a Game Boy. So a lot of my life has been kind of revolving around that. Initially, I've always kind of wanted to go into YouTube, but was as a gamer group. And funny enough, I've had another idea, kind of similar to the concept of Double Time, where it was split screen. If I'm remembering this correctly, I made this up in like high school with one of my other friends, who's also a part of our table. But the design was to basically play a single player game, but one person hold one side of the controller and the other person hold the other side, and you only can use what you can from that side.
You get a camera on that. You have I've seen so many different like Minecraft videos exactly with that concept of just like I have the mouse and he has the keyboard. What happens? Like you're definitely a visionary, I must say.
So I mean, eventually grew out of that, went to college, came back, just started to work. And my job had then changed from doing retail into what I kind of do now. And that's given me the freedom to look at other things that I wanted to do. Initially, I've been a trophy hunter on PlayStation for forever, sitting at about like 7,000 trophies, I think.
Wow.
But I haven't been playing games lately because this has encompassed my life. I fell in love with it, and it hit me very hard. The moment that I started doing it, it was just kind of like a fun thing. We just played the game. I would do a little bit of some planning on the background while we would do other things and play games between several weeks. This was back at the house with 5 other people. Now I live in an apartment with my beautiful girlfriend of 4 years, and we have kind of created this show. Something that kind of started my love for writing, which is one of the biggest things that kind of drives me to continue this, is creating a story. And this story was derived from the game Persona 5. It was probably the first thing that changed my perspective on writing. Because before, I have never been a very good writer, never talented or a lot less confident in my writing. I joined a roleplay group where everything was just text, and you would play in the fantasy world of Persona 5, which, if you have no knowledge of, is this huge thing about the arcanas, and a lot of character stuff is involved. A lot of in-depth character stuff. And initially, I was only just playing as a character that was already in the game, because I didn't know what to do. I never played any of this stuff before. I barely ever roleplayed. And then I was watching other people, and watching them make their characters. And I went, I want to do that. These people have grown to creating these characters. I'm like, I'll do something like that. So I started making a character, didn't know anything about where it was going. And even then, it was fully improvised. I realized I'm quick to think about something. I'll have an image, just a base image, and then go from there. And it creates this foundation that's extremely well thought out and bloomed. The character I had he was extremely old. He was about like 63, being, I think, 19 at the time. It's like, it was a little weird.
A little disconnect, yeah.
A little bit. But the only thing that I had for him was he had to protect someone called the Madam. He would consistently go home talking about the Madam, but never gave any details. At the time, I had nothing for this. No idea of who or what the Madam was, and didn't even think that it necessarily mattered. Until everyone was telling me that they want to know. So then, immediately, in the same maybe 15-minute moment, I created a whole life behind him. The Madam is his granddaughter. And the reason why they're called the Madam is because they're the head of the household when they become a certain age. They live in a nice home that's filled to the brim with technology that they're self-developing, and the reason why they've always believed in the Madam being the head of the household is because of the past situations between their ancestors where they've been able to solve problems through peaceful means rather than chaotic means, not memes. And then it just developed further from there. I created more life for the character, and there's a moment that I think has kind of solidified my love for creative writing, was the death of my character. We played for well over a year, and everyone had gotten so invested in their characters intertwined with mine, and playing and talking and kind of role-playing. And when the moment happened, everyone felt genuinely emotional. I know that because I was a moderator for this group. It was an amino, so it's just a chat room basically. And I was getting pictures from some of the players of them crying, and it just kind of solidified that moment of, I want to do something like this. So from there, that's when I started essentially watching D&D. Because before that point, before the group unfortunately ended, because, I mean, you can't really continue the same thing for too long when it's video game based. You kind of run out of ideas, or people kind of lose interest. The moment that it kind of ran out, I started watching D&D. That's when I first noticed it from the other group. So it was just a very smooth transition. And now these two characters that I've made have been everything. I've made them into the D&D world. I've made them in other video game worlds, created easily like a 30-page background from them in the past and a 20-page D&D setting. The creative aspect of content creating, character design, magic item design is something that I find the most free. You can quite literally make something out of nothing. And that's one of the biggest things for me, was creating a story that someone else would experience.
Yeah, you telling that story is, I kind of want to go ahead and end it there, mostly because like it is not only a beautiful story about how you first got into this, and a summarization of how you got into the way that we found, I personally found you in the first place, but it leads us all back to an initial showing of each of your creative endeavors in terms of D&D and your creative writing. And I had initially, I'll be honest with you, I had initially had my doubts about including someone who doesn't exactly do freelance work inside this podcast, all about creating freelance work. But this goes to show that having an online this online community that we have of editors, audio working, artists, voice actors, all these sort of things, they all are intertwined in one way or another. And I think that your story is excellent for showcasing that all these sort of things can be found in different little pockets. And
absolutely.
And I appreciate you telling me everything about that. We're gonna go ahead and I think end this episode here, but I just want to go and say, Tyler, thank you so much for coming onto this podcast, and I would like to go ahead and shout out Missrolled Adventures. That's at Missrolled, Missrolled on Twitter. You can go ahead and find their podcast on multiple different podcasting platforms, on Anchor as well, and you can also look them up on YouTube. But you can find everything that they are at Missrolled on Twitter. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. And like you said, it was. I remember messaging you saying, "Hey, I'm not exactly a content creator. I don't sell any products or anything like that. But is this okay if I sent you some ideas?" And we just kind of bounced back and forth. And that's when we just kind of decided to, in fact, have the interview. So thank you so much for giving me this chance.
Oh, of course, and I definitely think that this shows that this show can be a lot more than the idea that I had initially planned, and I appreciate you for going ahead and coming out.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Commissions Open. If you would, please go ahead and follow this podcast wherever you get it. I would most definitely appreciate it. Leave a like and review if you would. It would help me out tremendously. And I want to give a huge shout out to Tyler for doing this interview with me. I know it's a little bit different out of format, but it's still amazing to go and hear your stories involving Dungeons & Dragons and your podcast. And you can follow Missrolled Adventures on Twitter at Missrolled. That's MISSROLLED on Twitter. You can also follow the artist behind the character designs of this podcast at Doidaflower, at DOIDUHFLOWER, and the icon creator, Mellowscav, at MELOSCAV. And I believe that's going to be everything for us. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Commissions Open, and have a wonderful day.